The night the desert storm hit, Rachel Miller was convinced she'd made the worst decision of her life. The wind howled like a wounded animal against the windows of her Honda, and the rain came down in sheets so thick she could barely see 5 feet ahead. Her children, 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jackson, huddled in the back seat, wide-eyed and silent for the first time in hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They'd been driving for 3 days, fleeing a foreclosure notice that had arrived at their Phoenix home on Monday morning. Rachel had spent 2 sleepless nights stuffing their lives into garbage bags and cardboard boxes, telling the kids it was an adventure, that they were going to start fresh somewhere new. But as she'd pulled onto Highway 89, heading north toward what she hoped would be a cheaper life in Flagstaff, the weight of her failures pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. The storm had caught them somewhere between Sedona and Cameron, in a stretch of road that felt like the edge of the world. Rachel had checked the weather app obsessively, but the forecast had shown nothing more than scattered showers. Now, as lightning split the sky and turned the red rocks of the desert into jagged silhouettes, she realized the app meant nothing out here, where civilization thinned to just a few scattered ranches and gas stations. "Mom?" Emma's voice trembled from the back seat. "I'm scared." Rachel glanced in the rearview mirror. Her daughter's face was pale, illuminated by the glow from the dashboard. Jackson had fallen asleep, his head resting against Emma's shoulder, clutching his stuffed elephant. Like a lifeline. "We're going to be fine, sweetheart," Rachel said, though her voice caught in her throat. She'd been saying that for weeks now, to the kids, to herself, to anyone who'd listen. "We're going to be fine. Everything will work out." But as the windshield wipers struggled against the torrential rain, and the car swayed in the wind like a toy, Rachel felt the words ring hollow. They'd passed the last gas station 30 miles back. The GPS on her phone had lost signal 2 hours ago. All she had was the highway, stretching endlessly into the storm, and the dwindling hope that they'd reach somewhere safe before the worst of it hit. That hope died when the car began to sputter. Rachel pumped the gas pedal, her heart hammering against her ribs. The fuel gauge had been hovering just above empty for the last 40 miles, but she'd been certain, or at least had desperately wanted to believe, that they could make it to the next station. The engine coughed again, then died completely. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the rain hammering against the roof and the sound of her own ragged breathing. "Mom?" Emma asked again, this time with a note of panic. "Why did we stop?" "Just a minute, baby," Rachel said, turning the key in the ignition. The starter clicked uselessly. "Everything's okay." But everything wasn't okay. They were stranded on a desert highway in the worst storm Rachel had ever seen, with no cell service, no gas, and night falling fast. The temperature was already dropping. Storms in the high desert could be deceptively cold, and Rachel knew with a sickening certainty that they couldn't stay in the car all night. She pulled the emergency brake and unbuckled her seatbelt. "Emma, honey, I need you to watch Jackson for a minute. I'm going to step outside and see if I can flag down another car." "Don't leave us!" Emma's cry pierced the air, and Jackson stirred awake, immediately beginning to whimper. Rachel's throat burned with unshed tears. "I won't, sweetheart. I'll be right outside the door, I promise." She grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, thankfully it still worked, and stepped out into the storm. The wind immediately knocked her back against the car, and rain soaked through her clothes in seconds. She shone the flashlight up and down the highway, but the beam barely penetrated the curtains of rain. No headlights in either direction. Nothing but darkness and the deafening roar of the storm. Rachel tried waving the flashlight anyway, forming desperate arcs in the air, but after 20 minutes her arms ached, and her hope had faded to a dull numbness. She climbed back into the car, teeth chattering, to find both children crying. "Is anyone coming to help us?" Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. Rachel opened her mouth to say yes, of course someone would come, but the lie stuck in her throat. Instead, she crawled into the back seat and pulled both children close, wrapping them in the emergency blanket she'd had the foresight to pack. "We're going to wait here for a while," she said instead. "The storm has to pass eventually." But as the hours crawled by and the temperature continued to drop, Rachel began to doubt even that. The car offered little shelter once the engine was off, and without heat, the metal frame became a refrigerator. The children dozed fitfully, waking every time thunder cracked or the wind shook the car. Around midnight, Rachel made a decision that terrified her, but seemed like their only option. They couldn't stay in the car all night. Hypothermia would set in before morning. She'd noticed a sign earlier, about a mile back, pointing to a scenic overlook. If there was an overlook, there might be some kind of shelter, even if just an overhang or a restroom building. "We're going to take a little walk," she told the children, trying to keep her voice steady. "Put on your jackets and stay close too." "Mummy?" Getting them dressed in the confined space of the car was a challenge, especially with Emma's increasing protests. "I don't want to go outside. It's scary out there." "I know, baby, but we can't stay here." Rachel zipped up Jackson's jacket and pulled his hood tight around his face. "We're going to find somewhere better to wait out the storm, like a cave or a building." As they stepped out into the howling wind, Rachel immediately regretted the decision. The rain felt like needles against their skin, and the force of the wind nearly knocked Jackson off his feet. She lifted him into her arms and grabbed Emma's hand, gripping it so tightly she worried she might hurt her daughter. But terror lent her strength. They stumbled along the shoulder of the highway, Rachel's flashlight casting a weak circle of light. That seemed to shrink with each step. The road was more difficult to navigate than she'd expected. Puddles had turned to small lakes, and the pavement was slick with water and debris. More than once, Rachel slipped, nearly falling with Jackson. In her arms, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, they reached the turnoff for the scenic overlook. The gravel road was even worse than the highway, churned into a muddy mess by the rain. Rachel's shoes filled with water, and her jeans stuck to her legs like a second skin. Emma was crying openly now, and Jackson had buried his face in Rachel's neck, his small body shaking with cold and fear. "Almost there," Rachel lied, having no idea what they would find. "Just a little further." The overlook, when they finally reached it, offered little comfort. It was just a wide pull-off area with a low stone wall and a wooden sign explaining the geological features of the area. No shelter, no building, nothing but open sky and the relentless assault of the storm. Rachel felt something break inside her. They were going to die out here. She was going to lose her children because she'd been too proud to ask for help, too ashamed to stay in Phoenix and face the judgment of friends and family who'd warned her about taking out that second mortgage. The tears she'd been holding back finally came, mixing with the rain on her face until she couldn't tell one from the other. She sank to her knees, still holding Jackson, and pulled Emma close. "I'm sorry," she whispered into their wet hair. "I'm so sorry." That's when she saw it. A faint light moving through the darkness, low to the ground and steady despite the wind. At first, she thought it was just her mind playing tricks, conjuring hope where there was none. But as she blinked away tears and rain, the light grew closer, accompanied by the sound of movement that somehow cut through the storm. A figure emerged from the darkness, leading what appeared to be two horses. As it drew nearer, Rachel could make out more details. A tall man in a wide-brimmed hat, wearing what looked like a traditional leather jacket and carrying a lantern in one hand. His face was weathered and strong, with features that spoke of Native American heritage. He stopped a few feet away, taking in the sight of Rachel and her children huddled on the ground. To her surprise, he spoke in perfect English, though his accent carried hints of something older, deeper. "Mom, you shouldn't be out here in this weather," Rachel tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. The man set down his lantern and approached slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. "My name is Joseph Benally. I was tracking a wounded elk when the storm hit. I have a shelter nearby where you and your children can wait it out." "Our car," Rachel managed to say, "we ran out of gas." Joseph nodded, as if this explained everything. "The main road is 2 miles east of here. My family's ranch is closer, 3 miles through the valley." He gestured toward the darkness beyond the overlook. "In this weather, 3 miles It will be 30, but I have horses." Hope flickered in Rachel's chest, fragile as a candle flame. "We couldn't possibly ask you to—" "You're not asking," Joseph interrupted gently. "And I'm not offering. I'm telling you what will happen. Now let's get you and your babies out of this storm before it gets worse." Somehow, the idea that it could get worse hadn't occurred to Rachel. Joseph secured the children to his horses, with practiced efficiency, using lengths of rope to create makeshift harnesses that would keep them safely mounted. He settled Jackson behind Emma on the larger horse, a patient mare named Shyla, then helped Rachel onto the second horse, a sturdy gelding called Thunder. "Follow close," Joseph instructed as he mounted behind Rachel. "Thunder knows the way even in the dark, but you'll need to trust him. And me." Rachel wanted to ask about his family, about where exactly they were going, but the storm made conversation impossible. As they moved away from the overlook, she focused on holding onto the saddle horn, feeling the strength of the horse beneath her and the solid presence of Joseph at her back. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The journey through the valley was a nightmare and a salvation all at once. The horses picked their way carefully through streams that had been dry washes that morning. Lightning illuminated their path intermittently, showing glimpses of the harsh beauty they moved through: towering red rocks, ancient juniper trees bent by the wind, and vast expanses of high desert that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon. More than once, Rachel thought they were lost. The darkness was absolute between lightning strikes, and the sound of the storm swallowed everything else. But Joseph's horses never hesitated, their movements steady and sure, and Joseph himself sat calmly behind her, occasionally offering quiet words of encouragement or pointing out landmarks invisible to Rachel's untrained eyes. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 40 minutes, they crested a small ridge, and Rachel saw what looked like a mirage. Warm light spilling from windows, smoke rising from a chimney despite the rain, the solid shapes of buildings clustered together. As they approached, figures appeared in doorways. A woman ran out into the rain, ignoring the storm to help Joseph dismount the horses. An older man emerged from what looked like a barn, leading the horses away with a gentle efficiency that spoke of decades of practice. Others, Rachel could see children's faces in the windows and more adults moving behind the glass, prepared for their arrival. "Welcome to our home," Joseph said simply, helping Rachel down from Thunder. "You're safe now." The woman who had come out to meet them wrapped a blanket around Rachel's shoulders and guided her toward the main house. "I'm Sarah, Joseph's sister," she said. "Let's get you and your children inside where it's warm." As they crossed the threshold, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the sensation of being caught by something stronger than fear, more reliable than hope. The house smelled of wood smoke and cooking, of generations of life lived within these walls. Her children were already being tended to by other women, their wet clothes exchanged for dry ones, hot drinks appearing as if by magic. "Your car will still be there tomorrow," Sarah said softly, reading the worry in Rachel's eyes. The storm won't last forever, even though it feels that way now. For tonight, rest. Let us care for you." But rest didn't come easily for Rachel. As she sat in a rocking chair near the fireplace, wrapped in quilts that smelled of cedar and sage, watching her children sleep peacefully on a nearby couch, her mind raced with questions and scenarios. How would they get back to their car? Even if they could, what then? The car had no gas, and the money in her wallet wouldn't buy more than a few gallons. They had nowhere to go, no plan, except the desperate hope that Flagstaff might offer a fresh start. Joseph sat in a chair across from her, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. He'd changed into dry clothes, but kept his hat, which Rachel now noticed bore intricate silver work along the band. In the firelight, his features were even more striking: high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to see more than just the surface of things. "You're running from something," he said quietly. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Rachel stiffened. "I'm trying to start over. There's a difference." "Sometimes, but running and starting over can look the same from the outside." He took a sip of coffee. "My grandfather used to say that when a person enters your path during a storm, they're meant to be there, not by chance, but by design." "Whose design?" Rachel asked, her voice sharp with exhaustion and skepticism. Joseph smiled slightly. "That depends on what you believe. The Creator, fate, chance, your own choices leading you to exactly where you need to be." He set down his mug and leaned forward. "What matters is what you do with the meeting. You could have turned us away, insisted on handling this alone. You didn't." "I couldn't," Rachel corrected. "My children were freezing. I was desperate." "Desperation can make us wise," Joseph observed, "or it can make us foolish. You chose wisdom by accepting help." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an elderly woman carrying a tray of food. She had silver hair braided down her back and moved with a grace that belied her years. "Eat," she said simply, setting the tray on the table between them. "Strength comes from nourishment, and wisdom comes from strength." As Rachel ate, deer, stew with vegetables from the family's garden, warm bread, and something sweet made with local berries. The elderly woman introduced herself as Margaret, Joseph's grandmother. The house began to settle for the night, children being ushered to bed, adults finishing their evening tasks. But Margaret remained, sitting in another chair and beginning to work on what looked like a piece of beadwork. "What brought you to the desert?" Margaret asked after a while, her fingers never stopping their intricate work. Rachel hesitated, unsure how much to share with these strangers who had saved them. But something in Margaret's steady gaze invited honesty. "Failure," she said finally. "I lost everything in Phoenix. My house, my job, my marriage fell apart 2 years ago. I thought I could handle it alone, start fresh somewhere cheaper, but I was wrong about a lot of things." Margaret nodded slowly. "The desert teaches us that we are never truly alone, even when we feel the most isolated. Every living thing here is connected, the plants, the animals, the rocks themselves. When outsiders come to our land, they often feel lost because they can't see these connections." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked, genuinely curious despite her exhaustion. "Your car ran out of gas exactly where it needed to," Margaret said. "Not there by accident. If you'd made it another mile, you would have missed the road to the overlook. If you'd passed the overlook, you would have been too far for Joseph to find you. The storm brought you here because this is where you needed to be." Rachel wanted to dismiss this as superstition, the kind of mystical thinking she'd left behind in her childhood. But as she looked around the warm room, at the faces of people who had taken them in without question, she felt a stirring of something she couldn't quite name. "I don't know how to repay you," she said instead, "for helping us tonight." "Help isn't meant to be repaid," Joseph said. "It's meant to be passed forward. But tomorrow, when the storm breaks, we'll discuss practical matters. Your car, your journey, where you're heading." As the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, Rachel found herself drifting towards sleep, for the first time in weeks without the tight knot of anxiety in her chest. The storm that had threatened to destroy them had instead delivered them to safety, to people who understood something about perseverance and community that she'd lost sight of in her pursuit of self-sufficiency. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in this moment, wrapped in blankets that smelled of sage and cedar, listening to the steady breathing of her children and the quiet murmur of Navajo voices speaking their ancient language, Rachel felt something she'd forgotten how to feel: protected, sheltered, connected to something larger than her own fears and failures. The storm was still working its will, but for the first time since the foreclosure notice arrived, Rachel wasn't facing it alone. She didn't know what the morning would bring, but as sleep finally claimed her, she carried with her the first whisper of hope she'd felt in months. Not the desperate, grasping hope of a drowning person, but the quiet certainty that sometimes, when we're most lost, we find exactly what we need. And as she drifted off, she could have sworn she heard Margaret humming softly, a melody that seemed to match the rhythm of the rain, as if even the storm was finding its way back to harmony after the chaos of the night. Dawn crept slowly across the high desert, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. Rachel woke to the sound of birds, actual birdsong, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night rushed back, and she sat up quickly, looking for her children. They were awake, sitting at a wooden table with several other children, eating what looked like fried bread with honey. Emma looked up and smiled. Her first genuine smile in weeks. Mom, Mrs. Sarah made breakfast and the storm stopped. Indeed, the wind had died to a gentle breeze and watery sunshine filtered through the windows. Outside, she could see the aftermath of the storm. Branches scattered across the yard, puddles that reflected the brightening sky, and the family's horses grazing peacefully in a nearby pasture. Sarah appeared with a steaming mug. "Coffee? I made it strong, figured you could use it." "Thank you." Rachel accepted the mug gratefully. "I should get dressed. Check on our car." "Already done," Sarah said. "Joseph and his cousin James went out just before sunrise. They're bringing it back now with gas and a jump start. Should be here within the hour." Rachel felt tears threatening again, but these were different from last night's despair. "You've all been so kind. I don't know what would have happened if—" "What would have happened is the Creator's business," Sarah interrupted gently. "What matters is what did happen. You're safe, your children are healthy, and today is a new day." Over the next hour, as Rachel helped clean up from breakfast and watched her children playing with the other kids, she learned more about the Benali family and their ranch. Joseph returned with her car, now running smoothly, and spent time showing Jackson how the engine worked while Emma practiced her numbers with Margaret's great-granddaughter. It was approaching mid-morning when Margaret called everyone together. In the main room, she'd prepared what looked like a family meeting, with everyone seated in a large circle, adults on chairs and couches, children on the floor. "Sometimes," Margaret began, speaking primarily to Rachel but addressing the whole family, "the desert brings people to us who are meant to stay for a while. Not just overnight, but long enough to find their path." Joseph sat forward. "We've discussed it as a family, and we'd like to offer you and your children a place here while you figure out your next steps. There's work to be done on the ranch, and Sarah needs help with the upcoming harvest festival. We're not rich, but we share what we have." Rachel's heart pounded. "I couldn't possibly—" "You could," Margaret said firmly. "Your car is fixed, but you still need gas money. Your children need stability after so much change. The desert brought you here for a reason." "We have a small house where visitors stay," Sarah added. "It needs some work. Been empty since last winter, but it has 2 bedrooms, a kitchen and a wood stove. The older kids could help you fix it up." Rachel looked at Emma and Jackson, who were listening intently to this conversation about their future. Emma's eyes held a hopeful gleam that reminded Rachel of how she used to look at the world before foreclosures and failed marriages had dulled her own optimism. "What kind of work?" Rachel asked, her practical side asserting itself. "Depends on your skills," Joseph said. "We raise horses, grow some crops, make traditional crafts for tourists. There's a co-op in Flagstaff that sells our jewelry and textiles. And we need help with the books. Our current system is mostly paper and memory. I worked in finance," Rachel admitted, "before everything fell apart. And I know computers." The family exchanged glances. "That could be very helpful," Joseph's Uncle Henry said. "We've been talking about modernizing our record-keeping for years." Sarah noticed Rachel's hesitation. "Stay for a week. Help us with the harvest preparation. See if this place feels right for you and your children. No pressure, no judgment if you decide to leave." That afternoon, while the children napped, Joseph offered to show Rachel the visitor's house. They walked across fields still muddy from the storm, passing vegetable gardens where squash vines sprawled among corn stalks and bean poles, the traditional 3 sisters planting method. The house was smaller than Rachel expected, but sturdy. Built of stone and timber, it had been constructed by Joseph's grandfather 50 years ago. "Families have lived here at different times," Joseph explained as they toured the rooms. "Usually people who needed a fresh start." The main room had a cast-iron wood stove and built-in bookshelves. The kitchen was basic but functional. The bedrooms were small but cozy, with windows that looked out over the valley. "Why would you trust strangers like this?" Rachel asked, genuinely puzzled by their generosity. Joseph leaned against the kitchen counter, considering his answer. "Have you ever read about the Navajo concept of Hoju?" Rachel shook her head. "It's usually translated as harmony or beauty, but it means much more. It's about walking in balance with everything around you, nature, people, the spiritual world. When you encounter someone in need, helping them maintains that balance. Ignoring them disrupts it." They walked outside to check the woodpile. "My grandfather moved our family here after his time in the war," Joseph continued. "World War II. He'd seen enough destruction and chose to build something instead. He started small, just a few horses, some land, but he always said that land becomes home when you share it." "Did you ever want to leave?" Rachel asked, surveying the endless horizon. "Went to college in Albuquerque. Studied business thought. I'd be the first Benali to wear a suit every day." Joseph smiled at the memory. "But my grandfather got sick my junior year. I came home to help and somehow never made it back to finish my degree. Do you regret it?" "Some days," he admitted. "But watching my kids grow up on the same land where my grandfather taught me to ride, where my mother learned to weave, there's value in continuity that can't be measured in dollars." They returned to the main house to find Rachel's car parked out front. James, Joseph's cousin, was finishing up the last touches. "All set," James declared. "Should run smooth now. Tanks are full, enough to get you to Flagstaff if that's still where you're headed." Rachel stood at a crossroads more significant than any highway junction. Her car was fixed. She had enough gas to reach the city. But as she watched Emma helping Sarah's daughter feed the chickens while Jackson built mud castles with the younger children, she realized something had shifted in the last 24 hours. "Could I try the week Sarah suggested?" Rachel asked quietly. "If the offer still stands." Margaret appeared at the door as if summoned by Rachel's decision. "Of course it stands. Offers like this don't expire with the sunset. Come, let's move. Your things to the visitor's house." The next morning, Rachel woke early to the sound of horses nickering in the distance. The visitor's house, despite needing some repairs, felt more like home than her Phoenix apartment had in its final months. She dressed quietly and slipped outside, finding Joseph already saddling horses in the stable. "Thought you might want to," "See the ranch properly," he said, not looking up from checking a stirrup. "Unless you'd rather sleep in. I'm not really a riding person," Rachel admitted. "You were riding last night in the worst storm I've seen in years," Joseph pointed out. "This will be easier." As the sun climbed higher, Joseph led her around the property on horseback. He showed her the trading post they ran from a converted barn where tourists stopped to buy jewelry and pottery made by family members. They visited the small chapel where multiple faiths had been practiced for generations. "Your family seems to blend different traditions," Rachel observed. "Out here, survival requires adaptation," Joseph explained. "My grandfather was traditional Navajo. My grandmother converted to Catholicism, but they found ways to honor both. The land doesn't care what words you use to pray. It responds to respect and care." They rode to a high point overlooking the valley. Rachel could see for miles in every direction, red rocks catching the morning light, distant mountains still crowned with snow, the ribbon of highway where their car had died. "Your children seem happier already," Joseph noted, letting his horse graze. "They aren't worried about what's next," Rachel said. "I wonder if that's naivety or wisdom." "Probably both. Children haven't learned to borrow trouble from tomorrow. Yet, when my marriage ended, I thought starting over meant leaving everything behind. Clean slate, new city." Rachel watched an eagle circle overhead. "I didn't realize that sometimes you need to land somewhere before you can start." "The land teaches patience," Joseph said. "Seeds don't rush to become trees. They take what nutrients they need. Wait for the right season." By midday, Rachel was working alongside Sarah in the garden, learning to identify weeds from herbs. Her hands grew dirty, her back ached, but the physical labor was oddly satisfying. The children played nearby, building forts from hay bales under Margaret's watchful eye. Over lunch, the family discussed the upcoming harvest festival. "We need to inventory our goods for the sale," Sarah explained to Rachel. "Normally, we use a ledger system my grandmother learned in boarding school, but it's getting unmanageable." "I could set up a simple spreadsheet system," Rachel offered. "Maybe teach whoever wants to learn." The afternoon was spent in the trading post, with Rachel examining the makeshift inventory system. Beautiful handcrafted items tracked with a combination of tag numbers and handwritten notes. She sketched out a basic database structure while Emma organized pottery by size, and Jackson carefully counted beads. When evening approached, the family gathered for dinner. The meal was communal. Various dishes passed around a large table, conversation flowing in a mixture of English and Navajo. Rachel found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't for months, contributing to discussions about weather patterns and sharing her children's achievements. After dinner, Joseph found her on the porch of the visitor's house, where she was studying the inventory notes by lamplight. "You work too hard," he observed. "Sitting on the steps beside her, trying to earn my keep," Rachel replied. "You earned it last night by surviving the storm and trusting strangers. Everything else is just living." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. The desert night was remarkably quiet compared to the city sounds Rachel had grown accustomed to. "Can I ask you something?" Rachel finally said. "Why did you really go to college in Albuquerque? Business doesn't seem to fit your path." Joseph chuckled. "My father's influence. He'd worked construction in various cities, believing the traditional ways weren't enough to survive the modern world. Wanted at least one of his children to have a degree, be able to navigate both worlds. And then you came back." "Sometimes the path circles back to its beginning," Joseph said. "But you bring what you've learned with you. The business courses help now when I'm dealing with suppliers or understanding contracts for the co-op." "Do you think I ran away from my path?" Rachel asked, voicing a fear that had been growing since their conversation earlier. "I think you ran towards something better for your children," Joseph said carefully. "Whether you left your true path or Found it by running. That's something only time will tell. The next morning, Rachel threw herself into organizing the trading post inventory. She created detailed categories, photographed items for an eventual online presence, and began teaching Sarah's teenage daughter, Marie, how to use the spreadsheet program she'd installed on the family's old computer. "This makes so much more sense than the ledger," Marie exclaimed, quickly grasping the digital concepts. "We could even track which items sell best at different times of year." By the third day, Rachel had established a routine. Mornings were spent in the garden or with the horses, learning ranch tasks. Afternoons were dedicated to the inventory project, with input from various family members who created the crafts. It was during one of these afternoon sessions that Rachel met Joseph's brother, Michael, who had just returned from a trip to collect supplies in Flagstaff. Michael was younger, with a quick smile and sharp business sense. "Joe tells me you're a financial wizard," Michael said, reviewing her proposed system. "Hardly a wizard, just someone who likes organization. Don't sell yourself short. This system could double our efficiency." Michael pulled up a chair. "Have you thought about staying beyond the week?" Rachel glanced at Emma and Jackson, who were learning to make bead necklaces with Margaret. "I haven't thought much beyond tomorrow lately. My girlfriend runs a small accounting firm in Flagstaff," Michael continued. "They're always looking for freelancers, especially ones who can work remotely. The pay isn't huge, but combined with part-time work here, the possibility hung in the air between them." Rachel hadn't allowed herself to imagine anything beyond immediate survival for so long that the idea of building something permanent felt both terrifying and appealing. That evening, Thomas insisted on teaching Rachel traditional bread making, while Sarah and Margaret worked on preparations for the festival. As flour covered their hands and the kitchen filled with the aroma of frying dough, Thomas shared stories of his grandmother's travels with the trader who became his grandfather. "She was just 17 when she met him," Thomas recalled. "He was a photographer, documenting traditional life for a book that never got published. Planned to stay 2 weeks, ended up staying 50 years. "Did she ever regret it?" Rachel asked. Thinking of her own interrupted journey. "Every life has regrets," Thomas said philosophically, "but when you plant yourself somewhere long enough, the roots and the regrets become part of the same soil." By the end of the week, Rachel had created not just an inventory system, but a basic website template for the family's crafts. She'd learned to identify native plants, help with horse grooming, and understand basic phrases in Navajo. More importantly, she'd watched her children bloom like desert flowers after rain. On the 7th night, the family gathered for what they called a family meeting, though Rachel realized it was more like a discussion about her future. "The week is ending tomorrow," Margaret began. "No one will pressure you to stay or go, but we want you to know your place here is real if you want it." Joseph added practical details. "The harvest festival is in 2 weeks. The inventory system you created will be crucial to its success. Michael has confirmed opportunities for accounting work in Flagstaff, which is only an hour away. The visitor's house repairs are nearly complete." Sarah focused on the children. "Emma has made friends with Marie and the other kids. Jackson follows Henry to the barn every morning like he was born to it. They've found their rhythm here." Rachel looked at her children, then around the circle of faces that had become familiar. "When I left Phoenix, I thought I was running toward a new beginning. I never expected to find a new family. Family isn't always about blood," Margaret said. "Sometimes the strongest ties are forged in storms." The next morning, instead of packing their bags, Rachel found herself meeting with Martha Evans, Michael's girlfriend who ran the accounting firm. Over coffee in Flagstaff, they discussed a flexible arrangement that would allow Rachel to work primarily from the ranch, with occasional trips to the city. "Small businesses need people who understand both numbers and people," Martha explained. "Your experience reorganizing the Benali's inventory system is exactly what my rural clients need." As Rachel drove back to the ranch that afternoon, she reflected on how storms had always terrified her, the loss of control, the unexpected destruction. But this storm had torn away the superficial layers of her life to reveal something essential, the capacity for community she'd forgotten she possessed. Emma was waiting at the gate when she arrived. "Mom, you came back. Joseph is teaching us how to train the new foal." "Of course I came back," Rachel said, realizing the truth of it. "This is home now." That evening, as they shared their first dinner as official residents rather than temporary guests, Rachel felt a peace she'd been chasing since long before the foreclosure notice arrived. The desert had tested her, stripped away her illusions of self-sufficiency, and forced her to accept help, to trust again. Later, as she tucked the children into bed in their new home, Emma asked, "Are we going to stay here forever?" "Forever is a long time," Rachel said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "But for now, we're exactly where we need to be." As she stepped out onto the porch that night, she found Joseph waiting with 2 cups of coffee. "Tomorrow, the real work begins," he said, handing her a cup. "No more guest privileges." "Good," Rachel replied. "I'm ready." Above them, the desert sky spread out in its infinite darkness, punctuated by stars that had guided travelers for millennia. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang its ancient song, and Rachel understood that she was no longer alone in answering it. She had found her place in the desert's endless story. The storm that had brought her here was just another verse in a song that continued, weaving new threads into patterns as old as the red rocks themselves. And tomorrow, she would wake up not as a stranger seeking shelter, but as someone with work to do, children to raise, and a community that had chosen to embrace her. The desert's lesson was complete. Sometimes losing your way is the only path to finding your home. And sometimes the scariest storms blow you exactly where you need to be, even if you can't see it, until the winds die down and the sun breaks through the clouds. 2 weeks after arriving at the ranch, Rachel stood on a wooden platform in the center of what had once been an empty field. Now it bustled with activity, colorful tents housing traditional crafts, food vendors grilling burgers and corn, and children running between booths with face paintings of thunderbirds and coyotes. The annual Harvest Festival had officially begun. "Nervous?" Martha asked, handing Rachel a paper cup filled with strong coffee. "Terrified," Rachel admitted. She'd volunteer to handle the main cashier station, where every sale would be processed through the system she'd designed. One glitch could derail the entire day's commerce. The morning sun warmed the crowd that gathered quickly, tourists from nearby resorts mixed with locals who'd been attending for decades. Margaret presided over the ceremonial opening, her voice carrying clearly as she spoke first in Navajo, then English, blessing the gathering and thanking the land for its abundance. Rachel's station became the heart of the festival's operations. The tablet she'd set up connected to a secured Wi-Fi network, processing credit cards and updating the inventory in real time. What had once taken hours of manual calculation now happened instantly. "This is incredible," Sarah said during a brief lull, watching transaction data populate on the screen. "We've already matched last year's morning sales, and it's not even noon." By midday, Rachel had developed a rhythm. Between sales, she observed the intricate dance of commerce and tradition around her. Joseph demonstrated traditional horse training techniques in a makeshift arena, while his brother Michael explained to curious onlookers how GPS technology was now used to track free-range cattle across thousands of acres. Emma had found a niche, selling small wind chimes she'd learned to make with Margaret's great-granddaughter. Jackson proudly wore a junior volunteer badge, helping to direct parking with Joseph's uncle Henry. "Mom!" Emma called out. "Mr. Roberts wants to buy 10 chimes for his gift shop in Sedona." Rachel processed the sale while Thomas, the gift shop owner, chatted with Emma about her techniques. "You know," he said to Rachel, "I've been looking for reliable suppliers of authentic crafts. Would you consider running an online store for the family? The idea hadn't occurred to Rachel, but as she watched various artists interact with customers, she realized there was demand that their current system couldn't meet. What would that involve? Monthly shipments of assorted items, wholesale pricing, guaranteed authenticity documentation, Thomas explained. Nothing huge at first, maybe $300 to $500 per month in orders, but it could grow. After Thomas left, Rachel discussed the proposition with Sarah. We'd need better photography of items, standardized packaging, maybe even a quality control process, Rachel mused. That sounds like a part-time job itself, Sarah observed. It does, Rachel agreed, realizing that she was already thinking in terms of expansion rather than mere survival. The afternoon brought unexpected challenges. A sudden gust of desert wind knocked over several display tents, sending pottery and jewelry scattering. Rachel watched in amazement as the community responded. Within minutes, protective tarps appeared. People were carefully collecting delicate items, and someone had produced a toolbox to reinforce the tent stakes. "This is what my grandfather meant by adaptation," Joseph said, finding Rachel amidst the controlled chaos. "The desert throws tests at you. We don't fight them. We incorporate them into our planning." As they worked to secure the festival grounds, against the wind, Rachel learned that this wasn't an isolated incident. The annual festival always faced weather challenges, and the family had developed creative solutions over the years. "Last year, we had an early freeze," James explained while hammering tent stakes deeper into the ground. "Everyone thought it would ruin everything, but we just moved the craft displays into the community center and turned it into an indoor market with hot cider." By sunset, the festival was declared a success. Sales had exceeded projections, new business connections had been made, and the weather had cooperated after its initial tantrum. As families packed up their booths, many stopped by Rachel's station to thank her for the efficient checkout system. "You've changed things here," an elderly woman named Dorothy said, collecting her day's earnings. "The young people always talk about progress, but you showed us how to keep our traditions while embracing new ways." That evening, exhausted but satisfied, the family gathered around Margaret's kitchen table for a post-festival debriefing. Lists of supplies needed, repairs to be made, and ideas for next year's event filled several notebook pages. "We should discuss Rachel's role moving forward," Margaret said finally. "The month's trial period is ending soon." Joseph shifted in his chair. "We've all watched Rachel integrate herself into the ranch's operations. She's proven invaluable not just during the festival, but in daily life. The accounting work from Flagstaff is steady," Michael added. "Martha says her clients specifically ask for Rachel now." Rachel felt her heart rate increase. This was the conversation she'd both anticipated and dreaded. "I need to be honest with all of you. When I arrived here, I was running away from failure. I couldn't imagine building anything again." "And now?" Sarah prompted gently. "Now I see possibility everywhere," Rachel admitted. "Not just for work, but for genuinely belonging somewhere. My children have found playmates and mentors. I've found purpose I didn't know I was missing." Margaret's weathered hands worked steadily on a piece of beadwork as she spoke. "Every year, the desert changes shape with wind and weather, but its essence remains. A place can hold many stories without losing its core." "We're offering you a place in our story," Joseph said directly. "Not just employment or temporary shelter, but a genuine place in this family's future." The silence that followed felt heavy with meaning. Rachel glanced at her children, both asleep on a nearby couch after their exciting day. They looked content, healthy, nothing like the frightened kids who'd huddled in a broken-down car less than a month ago. "I accept," Rachel said simply, "if you'll have us permanently." The next morning, Rachel found herself reviewing legal documents with Michael's lawyer friend, turning their informal arrangement into something more official. The visitor's house would become their permanent residence, with modest rent that reflected her work for the ranch. Her accounting position would expand to include managing online sales, with profit-sharing arrangements. You know, the lawyer noted as they signed papers. This is an unusual setup for inherited tribal land. The family could have just hired you for the work without offering permanent residence. Rachel had wondered about this. I think they see beyond traditional boundaries, she said. Joseph once told me their grandfather believed land becomes home when you share it. Wise man. The lawyer agreed. The world needs more of that wisdom. Later that day, while Rachel was training with Martha in Flagstaff to take on larger accounting clients, she received an unexpected phone call. Her ex-husband David had tracked her down through the forwarding address she'd left with the postal service. Rachel, what the hell are you doing on a reservation? His voice carried the same condescending tone she remembered. The kids need proper education, medical care. They have both. Rachel interrupted calmly. There's a school here that combines traditional and modern curricula, and the nearest hospital is only 40 minutes away. This isn't what we discussed for their future. We didn't discuss anything about their future, David. You didn't even fight for custody. The conversation ended badly, but Rachel felt a new strength. 3 months ago, his criticism would have shattered her. Now it felt like noise against the solid foundation she'd built. When she returned to the ranch that evening, she found Joseph working in the workshop, crafting a new saddle. She paused in the doorway, struck by the competence in his movements, the way his hands knew exactly what to do without hesitation. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her presence. "Just had an interesting conversation with my ex," she said, stepping into the workshop. "Made me realize how much has changed." Joseph continued his work as she talked, offering occasional comments, but mostly letting her process. When she finished, he finally looked up. "Change happens whether we choose it or not. The question is whether we fight against it or learn to dance with it." "I'm learning to dance," Rachel said with a smile. Over the following weeks, Rachel threw herself into developing the online store component of the ranch's business. She spent hours photographing items with proper lighting, writing descriptions that captured both their beauty and cultural significance, and building relationships with craft suppliers across the Southwest. Emma discovered a talent for creating product videos, using Rachel's phone to capture the process of bead weaving or pottery painting. Jackson became the unofficial mascot, his genuine excitement for each item, adding charm to the videos. "People trust authentic voices," Martha observed during one of their weekly meetings. "Your children's honest reactions generate more sales than professional marketing could." By December, 2 significant developments occurred. First, their online store had generated enough interest to require hiring additional help. Sarah's nephew Marcus, who had moved back to the reservation after completing college, agreed to manage shipping and customer service. Second, Rachel received an unexpected visit from her sister Jennifer, whom she hadn't seen since they'd loaded the car in Phoenix. "I was worried sick," Jennifer said, standing on the visitor's house porch, "when your landlord said you'd left with no forwarding address except some reservation." "I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything," Rachel admitted. "Things happened so fast, and I was too ashamed to admit how badly I'd failed." Jennifer hugged her tightly. "From what I can see, you didn't fail at all. You found what you needed." Over dinner, Jennifer met the family and saw Rachel's new life firsthand. She watched Emma explain traditional weaving patterns, while Jackson demonstrated how to care for the horses he'd adopted as his special project. "I never saw you this relaxed," Jennifer whispered to Rachel during a quiet moment. "Even in the best days of your marriage, I never felt this capable before," Rachel admitted. "Turns out I wasn't weak for needing help. I was determined for accept it when it appeared. that winter brought unique challenges. Snow dusted the red rocks, creating a stark beauty that Rachel's city-conditioned mind struggled to process. The online business slowed, but Rachel focused on expanding their wholesale accounts and preparing for the spring tourist season. She also began documenting the family's traditional knowledge at Margaret's suggestion. "Many of our stories aren't written down," Margaret explained. "We need people who can translate them for outsiders without losing their essence." Rachel spent evenings recording Margaret's stories, learning about Navajo philosophy, creation myths, and practical wisdom passed through generations. Some nights, the two women sat by firelight as Margaret shared tales that reminded Rachel of her own grandmother's stories from Mississippi, different cultures, similar themes of resilience and connection. Joseph often joined these sessions, adding technical details about horse training or land management that revealed how traditional knowledge adapted to modern challenges. These conversations deepened Rachel's understanding not just of her host family, but of how different cultural approaches to life could inform each other. One evening in February, as a rare snowstorm blanketed the valley, the power went out. Instead of panic, the family gathered candles and lanterns, created a makeshift sleeping area in the main house's living room, and told stories late into the night. Jackson fell asleep in Joseph's lap while Emma practiced the Navajo words she'd been learning. Rachel watched her children fully integrated into this family's rhythms and traditions, never feeling the need to erase their own identities but adding new layers of culture and understanding. When spring arrived, Rachel celebrated her 6-month anniversary on the ranch by organizing a community workshop, teaching her accounting system to other reservation businesses. Word had spread about the efficiency gained at the Benally Ranch, and several local entrepreneurs wanted to implement similar systems. "You're becoming part of the solution to modernizing without losing identity," Sarah's cousin Rita noted during the workshop. "That's what our elders hoped would happen when they encouraged us to get education." The workshop revealed another opportunity. Several attendees needed ongoing support implementing their systems, and Martha's firm couldn't meet the demand. Rachel found herself creating a consulting practice that served reservation businesses specifically, understanding their unique challenges and cultural contexts. By summer, the ranch had expanded its operations to include guided horseback tours for tourists interested in traditional Navajo perspectives on land management. Rachel handled the business logistics while family members led the tours, sharing stories about specific locations and their significance. Emma and Jackson had adjusted completely to reservation life. They spoke basic Navajo phrases, participated in traditional ceremonies when invited, and had friends who taught them traditional games and skills. Their classmates' families had welcomed Rachel too, inviting her to community events and including her in the subtle social networks that made rural life function. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors, Joseph sat beside Rachel on the porch that had replaced their initial meeting place. "You remember that first morning after the storm?" he asked, vividly. "I was terrified." "You kept saying you were running from failure," Joseph continued. "But watching you now, I wonder if maybe you were running toward something better all along." "The storm forced me to stop running," Rachel reflected, "and staying still long enough let me see what was actually around me." "Sometimes the universe uses storms to redirect us," Joseph agreed. "My grandfather said change is like the river in flood season. It seems destructive, but it's just finding its proper path." As they sat in comfortable silence, Rachel thought about how her definition of home had evolved. It wasn't just the visitor's house that now held their memories, decorations, and the accumulated stuff of daily life. Home had expanded to include morning coffee with Margaret, Emma's participation in the children's weaving circle, Jackson's responsibility for training the new puppies, and her own integration into the economic and social fabric of the community. The storm that had threatened to destroy everything had instead revealed a truth she'd forgotten, that humans aren't built for isolation, that strength comes not from self-sufficiency, but from knowing when to accept help, and that sometimes losing your way is the only path to finding where you truly belong. 3 months later, at the next harvest festival, Rachel stood at her cashier station with new confidence. The system ran smoothly, enhanced by lessons learned from the previous year. The online store promotion brought in curious tourists, and the community workshop participants showcased their own modernized inventory systems. But the most significant change was in Rachel herself. As she processed sales, consulted with vendors, and managed the complex logistics of desert commerce, she moved with the certainty of someone who had found her place. The desert had tested her, challenged her preconceptions, and ultimately taught her that sometimes our greatest failures are merely invitations to discover our truest paths. When Margaret performed the closing ceremony that evening, thanking the land and the visitors for their presence, Rachel understood she was no longer just a grateful guest. She had become part of the landscape itself, changed by it, but also changing it in small, meaningful ways. The storm that had stranded them had been more than weather. It had been a transformation disguised as catastrophe, forcing her to abandon her isolation and discover that true strength emerges when we let others carry us through our darkest moments. And in letting herself be carried, Rachel had learned how to carry others in return. As the community celebrated long into the night, Rachel watched her children dancing with their friends around the ceremonial fire, their laughter mixing with traditional songs and modern music. The desert sky was clear now, stars brilliant in the darkness, and for the first time in years, Rachel felt no urge to run toward them. She had finally found her ground. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in November, nearly a year since. The storm that had changed everything. Rachel was reconciling accounts in the trading post office when Sarah rushed in, face pale with worry. "Joseph's had an accident. He's at the hospital in Flagstaff." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Rachel's hands gripped the steering wheel as Sarah explained what had happened. Joseph had been working to save horses trapped by flash flooding in a distant canyon. During the rescue, his footing gave way on wet rocks, sending him tumbling over. 40 feet. He saved 3 horses, Sarah said quietly. 2 of them were pregnant mares. At the hospital, they found the family gathered in the waiting room. Margaret sat quietly, her weathered hands working prayer beads. Michael paced nervously, while various cousins, aunts, and uncles spoke in hushed tones, mixing English and Navajo. "In their worry, the doctors said he's lucky to be alive," Margaret told Rachel when she approached. "Internal injuries, several broken bones. He'll need surgery." Rachel felt a hollowness in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. Over the past year, Joseph had become more than just her rescuer. Their evening conversations, shared work on the ranch, and the gentle way he'd mentored her children had grown into something she'd been too afraid to name. Emma and Jackson had accompanied them to the hospital, and now they sat quietly with the other children, drawing pictures to decorate Joseph's room when he woke up. The sight of them fitting so naturally into this family crisis only emphasized how deeply they'd all become intertwined. When they were finally allowed to see Joseph, Rachel hung back, letting family members visit first. But Margaret beckoned. "Her forward, you come too. He asked for you earlier." Joseph lay surrounded by monitors and IV lines, his skin unusually pale beneath his tan, but his eyes were alert when they entered. "How are the horses?" were his first words. "Safe and grateful," Michael assured him. "Thanks to you." Joseph's gaze found Rachel. "You're here," he said softly, then winced as pain caught up with the movement. Couldn't have a ranch manager slacking off like this. Rachel attempted a joke, but her voice trembled. Later, as family members rotated through visiting shifts, Rachel found herself alone with Margaret in the hospital cafeteria. "You know," Margaret said, stirring sugar into her coffee, "when my grandmother's husband was injured in a similar accident, the family performed a healing ceremony. Not to replace modern medicine, but to support it." Rachel nodded, uncertain where this conversation was leading. "There's strength in acknowledging our connections," Margaret continued. "When one person is hurt, the whole web trembles. Denying connections doesn't make us safer, it makes us weaker." Over the following days, Rachel essentially moved into the hospital. She coordinated with Martha to handle urgent accounting work, remotely arranged for Emma and Jackson to stay with Sarah, and maintained vigil at Joseph's bedside. During this time, many things became clearer. The extended family network revealed its full depth during this crisis. Relatives arrived from across the Southwest, bringing traditional foods, offering prayers, and maintaining various ceremonies to support Joseph's healing. Rachel witnessed firsthand how community functioned at its deepest level, not just shared work and social gatherings, but genuine interdependence in times of need. On the fourth night, when most visitors had left, Rachel sat alone with Joseph. He'd been drifting in and out of sleep, but suddenly his hand moved toward hers. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice rough, "about paths and choices." "Save your strength," Rachel urged. "No," he insisted, "I need to say this. Last year I told you the desert brings people together for a reason. I believed it theoretically. But Rachel, I wasn't prepared for you." Her heart raced. "Joseph, let me finish while I'm coherent enough," he continued. "I spent years helping people find their way, watching them pass through. Never expected to want someone to stay. Never expected to need someone to stay." Rachel gently squeezed his hand. "The feeling isn't one-sided." "I know it isn't," he smiled slightly. "I've watched you build a life here, but more than that, you've helped build our life, the ranch's life. You haven't just adapted to our way, you've helped us adapt too." His words hung in the air as nurses bustled in for evening checks. Rachel stayed late into the night, processing emotions she'd kept carefully contained for months. The next week brought both challenges and progress. Joseph underwent successful surgery, but recovery would require months of physical therapy. The ranch needed him, especially with winter approaching and its particular challenges. Rachel found herself stepping into leadership roles she'd never anticipated. Working with Michael and Sarah, she helped coordinate ranch operations, maintained the growing online business, and ensured traditional preparations for winter were completed. "You've changed since that first night," Sarah observed one evening as they organized inventory for winter supply runs. "You used to flinch when people counted on you." "I still do sometimes," Rachel admitted. "But watching Joseph take risks to help others, it shows me what real strength looks like." The winter months tested everyone. With Joseph recovering and the desert weather particularly harsh, the community's true character emerged. Rachel witnessed how ranch work continued despite adversity. Horses still needed feeding, online orders still required fulfillment, and traditional ceremonies still marked the changing seasons. During this time, Rachel also discovered the depth of her feelings for Joseph. Spending hours at his bedside, managing his rehabilitation appointments, and watching him struggle to accept his temporary limitations revealed sides of both of them that casual interactions had hidden. One day in February, as they sat in the hospital's rehabilitation center watching him work with physical therapists, Margaret asked Rachel directly, "Have you considered what happens when he's fully healed?" "What do you mean?" "Whether you're prepared for what comes next. Caring for someone during a crisis is different from building a life with them." Rachel watched Joseph concentrate on his exercises, his determination evident even in pain. I think I already am building a life with him. We just haven't named it yet. Margaret nodded approvingly. Names have power, but actions have soul. As spring approached, Joseph's recovery progressed enough for him to return home, though still with significant limitations. The family modified. The main house with ramps and adjusted furniture to accommodate his needs. Rachel found herself naturally transitioning into a caregiver role, helping with daily tasks while maintaining her other responsibilities. Their daily interactions took on new intimacy, not just conversations about work or children, but deeper discussions about life, dreams, and the intersection of their paths. One evening, while helping Joseph with exercises on the porch, rain began to fall, reminding them both of the storm that had brought them together. "Another storm," Rachel observed. "Different kind," Joseph replied, working to stretch his healing leg. "This one's inside us." "Is that bad?" "Depends on whether we let it tear us apart or bring us together stronger." Emma and Jackson had adapted, remarkably, to Joseph's situation. They'd created a schedule to read to him, help with exercises, and keep him updated on their school projects. Their bond with him had deepened through this crisis, and Rachel often found them curled up with him during his rest periods, sharing stories or working on homework together. By summer, Joseph was well enough to resume limited ranch duties. The family celebrated with a traditional ceremony of Thanksgiving. During the feast that followed, Thomas stood to speak. "A year and a half ago, a storm brought strangers to our door. Today, I look around and see no strangers, only family. The land teaches us that growth comes from what challenges us, not from what comforts us." After the ceremony, Joseph found Rachel helping clean up. "Walk with me?" he asked. They strolled slowly to accommodate his still healing body, ending at the overlook where she'd once waited in desperation. The view stretched endlessly, but now Rachel saw details she'd missed that frightening night. The way certain rocks held the late afternoon light, how native plants created unexpected color patterns, how distance and difficulty hadn't lessened the landscape's beauty, but revealed it. "I need to tell you something," Joseph said. "During the worst of my recovery, when pain made it hard to think, one thought remained constant. What was that? That I couldn't imagine facing anything else without you beside me." He turned to face her. "I've loved you for months, Rachel. Fought it at first, thought it might complicate what you were building here. But near-death experiences have a way of simplifying truth." Rachel felt tears forming, not from sadness, but from finally hearing words she'd been afraid to hope for. "I love you too, have for a while now, scared me to death." "We've both known enough fear," Joseph said. "Maybe it's time for courage instead." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Margaret raised her coffee cup. "To storms that change, a direction, and to those brave enough to follow where they lead." The following weeks brought discussions about the future. Joseph and Rachel talked about merging their lives more officially, about expanding the visitors' house to accommodate everyone, about the children who already called them family wanting. To make it official, Emma and Jackson had input too. "Can we have horses in our backyard if you marry each other?" Jackson asked innocently during dinner. "You already have horses in your backyard," Sarah laughed. "But they'll be our horses," Emma corrected. "Family horses." The simple wisdom of children often cut through adult complexity. Rachel and Joseph exchanged glances, recognizing that their household was already blended. Marriage would simply formalize connections that existed in practice. In September, exactly 2 years after the storm that changed everything, the family gathered for another celebration. This time, not for survival of crisis, but for choosing love despite its risks. The ceremony took place at sunset on the same overlook where Rachel had once surrendered to despair. Margaret performed the service in both Navajo and English, weaving traditional blessings with contemporary vows. Emma and Jackson stood as witnesses alongside the extended family who'd embraced them all. Love. is like the desert," Margaret said during the ceremony. "Sometimes harsh, always testing, but for those who learn its rhythms, endlessly sustaining. You have already proven you can weather storms together. Now you choose to share sunshine as well." After the vows, as the desert sky painted itself in celebration colors, Joseph held Rachel's hand tightly. "Last time we were here together, you were running from everything." "Last time we were here, I was lost," Rachel corrected. "Now I'm found." "We're found," Joseph emphasized, including Emma and Jackson in his gaze. The celebration continued late into the night. The trading post's inventory system processed gift registrations, online orders continued coming in, and horses grazed peacefully nearby. Life's practical necessities hadn't disappeared because love had been declared. They simply gained new context. As the family prepared to depart for their respective homes, Rachel and Joseph remained at the overlook with their children. The moon had risen, full and bright, illuminating the landscape in silver light. "You know," Emma said thoughtfully, "that storm was scary back then." "Very scary," Rachel agreed, "but I'm kind of glad it happened," Emma continued, "because otherwise we wouldn't have our family, and horses, and Uncle Joseph wouldn't be your husband now." "Uncle Joseph is now Dad to you and Jackson," Joseph gently corrected. Jackson considered this seriously. "Can we still call you Uncle Joseph sometimes? Just because?" "You can call me whatever feels right," Joseph assured him. "What matters is, we're together." Rachel watched this exchange with profound gratitude. The children she'd been terrified to raise alone now had an entire community claiming them. The life she'd thought was ending had transformed into something more meaningful than anything she'd dared to imagine. Later, as they walked back toward their home, expanded now to accommodate their joined family, Rachel reflected on the unexpected gift of that horrible night. She'd thought she was saving her children by leaving Phoenix. In reality, she'd been leading them to exactly where they needed to be, though she'd been too frightened and proud to see it. The desert had taught her its most valuable lesson. Surrender isn't always defeat. Sometimes it's the path to finding everything you didn't know you needed. And in letting herself be carried through that storm, she'd discovered her own capacity to carry others through theirs. As they entered their house, no longer the visitor's dwelling but truly home, Rachel felt complete peace, not because life had become easy, but because she'd finally learned that facing difficulties with others was infinitely better than managing comfort alone. Emma and Jackson chattered about tomorrow's plans, riding lessons with their new dad, jewelry making with Sarah, computer time with Uncle Michael. Their voices carried the confidence of children who knew where they belonged. Joseph squeezed Rachel's hand as they listened. "Happy?" he asked simply. "More than I knew possible," she replied honestly. Outside, the desert night settled into its ancient quiet. No storm threatened on the horizon, just the endless expanse of sky and stars. But Rachel knew now that if storms did come, and they surely would, she would weather them not with desperate, solitary determination, but with the strength of love, community, and the wisdom to accept help when it was needed most. The land had changed them all, but they had changed it too. New systems, new connections, new stories layered over ancient ones. And at the heart of it all, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, circumstance, and the recognition that sometimes the most terrifying moments deliver us to our truest home. As Rachel drifted off to sleep that night, she thought one final time about that desperate woman who'd stranded on a dark highway, convinced everything was lost. She wished she could somehow reach back through time to comfort her past self, to whisper that within a day's journey lay everything she would ever need to be whole again. But perhaps the lesson required living through the terror and uncertainty that made the eventual joy more precious. The desert, after all, never revealed its gifts easily, but for those patient enough to learn its ways, the rewards were immeasurable. and Rachel had finally learned to be patient with both the desert and herself. In the morning, life would continue its intricate dance of tradition and innovation, survival and flourishing, individual paths and community purposes. But tomorrow's challenges would be faced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more connected than the frightened woman who'd once given up hope in a storm. That woman had been transformed, not by avoiding storms, but by learning to trust those who would carry her through them, and in that transformation lay the true meaning of home. The desert wind whispered against the windows, no longer a threat but a lullaby, singing ancient songs of resilience, connection, and love. Rachel slept deeply, held by both the land and the people who'd claimed her as their own. After all, she was home at last. 3 years to the day after the storm that changed everything, Rachel stood on the newly expanded porch of what was now officially the Benally Miller house, watching the morning sun paint the desert in shades of amber and rose. In her arms, she held their 6-month-old daughter, Elena, whose dark hair caught the early light like her father's. Joseph emerged from the house carrying twins, 4-year-old Benjamin and Sophia, whom they'd welcomed into their family through the tribal adoption program 6 months before Elena's birth. The children chatted excitedly about the day ahead, a solar panel installation that would finally bring full off-grid capability to the ranch. "Ready for the big day?" Michael called from the driveway, where several vehicles waited for the drive to the installation site. "More than ready," Rachel replied, shifting Elena to Joseph's arms. Since their marriage, the family had secured grants to modernize the ranch's infrastructure without compromising its traditional foundations. The solar project represented months of planning, combining cutting-edge technology with environmental respect. As they loaded the children into vehicles, Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from Emma, now 15 and spending her gap year studying at a university in Santa Fe before starting college proper. "Can't wait to see the solar array when I visit next month. Mom, you're revolutionizing desert living." "Your mom's revolutionizing everything," Joseph murmured, reading over her shoulder. "Our mom," Rachel corrected automatically. In the 3 years since their marriage, they'd worked to ensure all their children understood they had equal claim to both parents. The drive to the installation site, a clear area 2 miles north of the main compound, took them past the visitor's house, now converted into an educational center where Rachel taught financial literacy and business management to young people from surrounding communities. Students came from as far as Window Rock and Tuba City to learn systems she'd developed specifically for small tribal businesses. At the site, Rachel found herself directing operations with practiced ease. The solar company's representatives consulted her on optimal panel placement, acknowledging her understanding of both the land's patterns and the family's energy needs. Margaret, now in her 80s but still sharp, provided traditional guidance about respecting the earth during installation. 3 years ago, you were afraid of asking for directions, Sarah observed during a break, watching Rachel coordinate between engineers and tribal elders. Now you're directing major projects. 3 years ago, I thought strength meant doing everything alone, Rachel responded. Now I know it means knowing when to lead and when to follow. The installation attracted attention from environmental groups studying sustainable rural development. A documentary crew had arrived, planning to feature the ranch as a model of how indigenous knowledge could inform modern sustainability practices. The traditional way isn't backward, Joseph explained to the film crew. Our ancestors understood conservation because their survival depended on it. We're just applying those same principles with new tools. By afternoon, the first panels were operational. As the system began generating power, the family gathered for a ceremony combining traditional blessings with modern achievement. Margaret spoke first in Navajo, asking the spirits to accept this new technology as a helper, not a conqueror. Lightning, Joseph's now elderly horse, grazed nearby with new foals running in the pasture. Emma, home briefly from her gap-year program, had trained several of them herself, continuing the family tradition while adding her own innovations. She'd developed a therapeutic riding program that served both the reservation community and veterans at the Phoenix VA hospital. "You've changed. How we see ourselves," Margaret told Rachel during the ceremony. "Not by rejecting what we are, but by showing us how we can grow." That evening, the extended family gathered at the main house for celebration. The solar panels had exceeded first-day production estimates, and already neighbors were asking about implementing similar systems. Rachel had begun compiling data for a grant proposal to replicate the project throughout the reservation. "Mama's phone won't stop buzzing," Benjamin observed from Emma's lap. "It's because Mama helps lots of people," Sophia explained, having absorbed the family's emphasis on community service. Emma grinned. "Mama's famous now." "Infamous is more like it," Rachel laughed. "Some people think I'm moving too fast with change." "Change moves whether we direct it or not," Joseph reminded her, echoing words his grandfather had often shared. "Better to guide it wisely than to stand in its path." Later that night, after the children were asleep and celebration guests had departed, Rachel and Joseph sat on their porch watching the stars. The solar system hummed quietly in the distance, storing energy for tomorrow's needs. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," Rachel admitted. "That night in the storm feels like someone else's life." "It was someone else's life," Joseph responded. "We've all become different people through what we've experienced together." "Better people?" "Different," he repeated carefully. "The desert doesn't make judgments about better or worse. It just shapes us to survive and thrive in specific conditions." Elena stirred in the baby monitor's speaker, letting out tiny sounds of awakening. Rachel moved to go to her, but Joseph touched her arm. "Can I tell you something? About that night we found you?" "Always." "I wasn't just hunting elk," he confessed. "I'd been riding for hours, wrestling with my own doubts about staying on the ranch, wondering if I was honoring my grandfather's memory or hiding from the larger world." Rachel turned to face him fully. "You never told me that. Finding you three in that storm, it answered my question. Sometimes our purpose reveals itself through serving others' needs." He smiled in the darkness. "You weren't the only one lost that night. But we found our way together." The next morning brought new challenges. A delegation from a major energy company arrived, interested in expanding solar development across the reservation. They'd heard about the ranch's successful integration of traditional values with modern technology. Rachel found herself negotiating complex contracts while ensuring the company understood and respected tribal sovereignty. The morning's meeting stretched past noon as she translated between corporate language and community needs. "Ms. Miller, I mean Mrs. Benelli," the lead executive corrected. "You've created something unique here. We want to replicate it extensively." "It's Mrs. Benelli Miller," Rachel corrected firmly, "and replication requires more than copying systems. It requires understanding culture." The negotiations continued over several days, with Rachel insisting on provisions for training local workers, respecting sacred sites, and ensuring profits directly benefited reservation communities. The energy company initially balked at her conditions, but gradually recognized their value in creating sustainable partnerships. During a break in negotiations, Jackson, now 11 and showing Joseph's steady temperament, approached with news. "Dad sent me to tell you, there's someone by your old car." The car that had stranded them that night still sat behind the workshop, preserved as both memorial and teaching tool. Jackson had recently begun restoring it as a mechanical project, with Joseph's guidance. When Rachel arrived, she found a woman standing by the car, accompanied by two children about the same age as Emma and Jackson had been during their own crisis. The woman's face held familiar desperation. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "I heard about this place, about how you help people. My car broke down 20 miles east. We've been sleeping in it for 2 days." Rachel's mind flashed back to her own terror, the suffocating helplessness. "I'm Claire," the woman continued. "These are my children, David and Luna. I thought maybe... I heard you offer shelter sometimes." "Always," Rachel said firmly. "Come, let's get you and your children fed and warm. We'll sort everything else after." As she led Claire and her children toward the main house, Rachel caught Joseph's eye. He nodded slightly, understanding passing between them without words. They would offer sanctuary just as the family had offered them. The cycle of help would continue. That evening, with Claire's children playing with the twins while Claire rested, Rachel reflected on how dramatically her perspective had shifted. Where once she would have seen taking in strangers as a burden, she now recognized it as both privilege and responsibility. "Will Claire stay like you did?" Emma asked. "Home for spring break and helping prepare dinner." "That's up to her," Rachel replied. "Everyone's journey is different. We just provide the safe space to figure it out." Later that week, as negotiations with the energy company concluded successfully, Rachel achieved a major milestone. The contract guaranteed job training for 200 tribal members, structured profit sharing with multiple reservation communities, and mandatory consultation with traditional knowledge holders on all projects. "You've learned to bridge 2 worlds, the company's CEO acknowledged during the signing ceremony. "That's a rare skill." "Not 2 worlds," Rachel corrected. "1 world with many ways of seeing it." The success brought media attention. Journalists arrived to profile the Phoenix banker who became a reservation innovator. Rachel granted interviews, reluctantly, aware that external recognition could disrupt delicate community balances. During one interview, a reporter asked about her greatest achievement since arriving at the ranch. "That's easy," Rachel responded, "learning to ask for help and accept it gracefully. Everything else grew from that foundation." The documentary film crew captured their daily rhythms. Rachel teaching financial literacy workshops in the converted visitors' house, Joseph explaining sustainable land management to university students, the children switching seamlessly between English and Navajo during play. Margaret, featured prominently in the film, spoke about cultural evolution. Rachel came to us carrying a loss, but what she didn't realize was she also carried gifts. Change isn't what happens to culture, it's how culture continues. As spring deepened, Claire made her decision. Unlike Rachel, she chose to move on after 2 months, having reconnected with family in California, but she left transformed, with new confidence and practical skills learned from the community. "You saved us," she told Rachel at their farewell gathering. "We caught you when you fell," Rachel corrected. "You did the rest of the work yourself." The departure prompted reflection throughout the family. Each person who passed through their lives left traces, just as they left traces on those they welcomed. That summer brought a milestone birthday for Margaret, her 85th. The celebration drew the largest gathering the ranch had seen, with relatives traveling from across the country. Rachel coordinated logistics that would have overwhelmed her 5 years ago, now moving through complexity with earned competence. During the ceremony, Margaret surprised everyone by presenting Rachel with an elaborate traditional jewelry piece. "This belonged to my grandmother," Margaret explained, as she fastened the silver and turquoise around Rachel's neck. "It's passed down through our mothers, but you've shown us family transcends blood." The weight of the jewelry felt like responsibility and honor combined. Rachel touched the intricate patterns, understanding she now carried not just personal history, but cultural continuity. "How do I live up to this?" Rachel whispered to Joseph later. "You already do," he assured her, "by being exactly who you've become." As summer progressed, Rachel's educational center expanded. She developed partnerships with 3 universities, offering internships for students interested in sustainable rural development. The center housed visiting scholars who studied her programs, combining traditional economics with modern business practices. Elena grew rapidly, showing early signs of inheriting her mother's analytical mind and her father's affinity for horses. The twins thrived under the family's careful integration, having arrived at the ranch with trauma from their previous situations, but gaining stability through predictable routines and unconditional acceptance. The older children returned for summer break. Emma, now preparing for college with plans to study sustainable architecture, brought friends to experience life at the ranch. Jackson, having turned 12, took increasing responsibility for the family's digital infrastructure, updating their online presence and expanding their e-commerce capabilities. During one evening's dinner discussion, Emma shared her college application essay thesis. "Home isn't where you come from, it's where you choose to put down roots." She'd written about their family's journey, the way crisis had revealed possibility. "I was 7 when that storm hit," Emma reflected. "I thought Mom could fix anything. When she couldn't fix the car, it terrified me. Now I understand she fixed something much more important." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "Our family's future. By asking for help, she helped us all find our place in the world." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "I barely remember Phoenix. This is the only home I really know." The children's words struck Rachel profoundly. What had felt like her greatest failure had become their foundation for security. The storm she'd weathered for them had taught them resilience by example. As autumn approaches, bringing another harvest festival, Rachel stood once again at the cashier station, now assisted by trained volunteers using the system she'd designed. The festival had grown significantly, drawing visitors from across the Southwest and generating substantial income for multiple reservation communities. Joseph, fully recovered from his accident and stronger for it, demonstrated traditional horsemanship. Alongside modern GPS tracking technology, Emma showcased her therapeutic riding program with a waiting list of participants from various backgrounds seeking healing through equine interaction. The energy company's first major installation was complete, employing dozens of tribal members in skilled positions. Checks from profit sharing had already funded new educational facilities in 3 reservation communities. That evening, as the festival celebration reached its peak, Rachel found herself surrounded by the cascading effects of choices made in crisis. The ranch had evolved into something neither traditional nor purely modern, but uniquely itself, a living example of how adaptation preserves essence rather than destroying it. During the ceremony marking the festival's close, Margaret called Rachel forward. "5 harvests ago, the desert sent us a storm," she began. "Within that storm came 3 gifts, a woman's wisdom, a girl's creativity, and a boy's determination." The crowd included many faces Rachel now knew well, former students, business partners, families they'd sheltered, and individuals whose lives had intersected with theirs in meaningful ways. "The greatest gift the desert gives," Margaret continued, "is the reminder that we're stronger together than alone." Rachel Miller came to us frightened and desperate. Rachel Benali Miller stands here having helped reshape not just our ranch, but our community's future. Applause rose around them, but Rachel's attention focused on her immediate family, Joseph holding Elena, the twins playing at his feet, Emma and Jackson standing tall at the edges of the circle. This was her accomplishment, not the system she'd built or the contracts she'd negotiated, but the family she'd helped nurture. Later, as cleanup continued under desert starlight, Joseph found Rachel organizing the day's financial records. "Still working?" he teased gently. "Still learning," she corrected. "Every day teaches something new, such as, today I learned that home isn't a place you arrive at. It's what you build along the way, stone by stone, relationship by relationship." Joseph gathered her close. The desert gives us storms not to destroy us, but to remind us why we need shelter and each other. Above them, the Colorado Plateaus. Infinite stars bore witness to stories ancient and new, traditional and innovative, individual and collective. The solar panels hummed quietly in the distance, storing energy harvested from the same sun that had illuminated their land for millennia. Rachel understood now that her journey hadn't been about escaping one life for another, but about discovering how multiple lives could weave together into something stronger than any could be alone. The storm that had threatened to break her had instead revealed her resilience, leading her to a community that taught her true strength grows from interdependence. As she looked across the ranch that had become home, Rachel saw not limitation but possibility. The desert's apparent harshness nurtured abundance for those who learned its patterns. Crisis hadn't ended her story, but had pivoted it toward greater meaning. 5 years ago, she'd been a stranger lost in a storm. Tonight, she was a mother, wife, teacher, innovator, woven inseparably into the landscape's living history, and tomorrow would bring new challenges, new storms perhaps, but she would face them not alone, but surrounded by family, guided by land wisdom, and grounded in the certain knowledge that asking for help had been the first step toward finding her truest self. The desert wind sang gentle songs that night, carrying stories of transformation and belonging across the ancient land. And in one family's home, children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that love forms the strongest shelter against any storm. 7 years after that fateful night, Rachel found herself arbitrating a heated debate in the newly established Benally Miller Innovation Center. The argument centered on whether to expand the solar program to other reservations through direct investment or through the creation of a cooperative model owned by tribal communities. Direct investment moves faster, argued James Bear, a young engineer who'd grown up on the reservation and returned with his Stanford degree. We could have systems installed in 6 communities by next spring. Speed without partnership is colonialism, countered Sarah's daughter Marie, now completing her PhD in Indigenous law. The cooperative model ensures long-term tribal sovereignty over energy resources. Rachel listened carefully, her role having evolved from financial advisor to bridge builder between innovation and tradition. The center, housed in a newly constructed building that incorporated both sustainable architecture and traditional design elements, had become a testing ground for economic models that could work across Indian country. The debate was interrupted by the arrival of a government delegation, including a deputy secretary from the Department of Energy. They were touring successful rural renewable energy projects and had heard about the ranch's unique approach. Mrs. Benally Miller, the deputy secretary, addressed Rachel. "We're particularly interested in your mixed economic model. The combination of traditional decision-making with modern corporate structures seems to be yielding remarkable results." As Rachel led the tour, she reflected on how her vocabulary had expanded. Terms like stakeholder engagement, culturally responsive development, and traditional knowledge integration had become part of her daily discourse, yet she could just as easily discuss horse bloodlines, seasonal planting cycles, and ceremonial protocols. The delegation was impressed by the community kitchen garden, where Eleanor, now a curious 7-year-old, explained the Three Sisters planting method to the visiting officials. "Corn, beans, and squash help each other grow," she said with Joseph's steady confidence, "like our family." Later that afternoon, Rachel received urgent news. Jack, the tribal elder who'd been instrumental in securing their first federal grants, had collapsed during a ceremony in a neighboring community. As his family's preferred healthcare proxy, Rachel coordinated his medical transport while Joseph drove through a gathering dust storm to reach the hospital. The incident highlighted A growing concern within the community, the vulnerable position of elders who carried irreplaceable knowledge. During Jack's recovery, Rachel organized an intensive oral history project, pairing elder wisdom keepers with younger community members trained in digital documentation techniques. "Knowledge should flow like water," Jack told Rachel from his hospital bed, his voice weak but determined. "Too long, we've worried about outsiders stealing our traditions, but if we don't teach the next generation, who will carry our wisdom forward?" This philosophy shaped Rachel's next major initiative. Working with tribal councils and academic institutions, she launched the Desert Wisdom Exchange, a platform that paired reservation communities with universities for knowledge sharing, ensuring traditional knowledge holders were compensated as consultants rather than exploited as subjects. Meanwhile, the family faced internal transitions. Jackson, now 14 and showing remarkable mechanical aptitude, announced his intention to apply for an aerospace engineering program that would require leaving home earlier than anticipated. His talent for troubleshooting complex systems had got the attention of NASA's CIRC program, targeting underserved communities. "I want to build satellites that can help monitor climate change on tribal lands," Jackson explained during a family dinner. "But I'll need to leave by next fall." Emma, having completed her first year of architecture school, supported her brother's dreams while sharing her own news. "My thesis project has been approved. I'm designing housing prototypes that can withstand extreme weather while maintaining traditional layout principles." The children Rachel had once desperately protected in a storm were now becoming protectors themselves, using education to address the challenges facing their communities. That summer brought drought conditions not seen in decades. The solar array Rachel had implemented proved crucial, providing power for wells that traditional electrical systems couldn't reach. Communities throughout the Southwest sought her expertise in water conservation systems integrated with renewable energy. During this crisis, Michael's daughter, Christina, returned from agricultural college with innovations in drought-resistant crops. She worked with Margaret to identify heritage varieties that had survived previous dry periods, creating seed banks that preserved both genetic diversity and cultural knowledge. "My grandmother told me these seeds survived because they were tended with prayers," Christina explained to visiting agricultural scientists. "We can study their genetic makeup, but we can't separate their resilience from the cultural practices that preserved them." The drought also revealed unforeseen strengths in the systems Rachel had helped establish. The digital inventory system now tracked not just commercial goods, but community resources during emergencies. The educational center became a crisis coordination hub, with students using their technology skills to map water sources and distribute supplies. During this challenging period, Rachel discovered she was pregnant again. The news came as both joy and concern. At 38, this would be considered a high-risk pregnancy, and with the drought straining resources, timing seemed problematic. "When did we ever have perfect timing for anything?" Joseph responded to her worries. "Our children arrive when they're meant to, whether through birth or circumstance." The pregnancy progressed well, though Rachel found herself delegating more responsibilities and trusting others to lead initiatives she'd previously managed directly. This shift revealed something profound about the organization she'd helped build. It no longer depended on any single person, but had developed its own sustainable ecosystem. By autumn, the drought broke with the most intense monsoon season in a decade. Floods threatened areas not adequately prepared. The ranch's emergency systems, developed through years of adaptation, proved invaluable. They coordinated rescue efforts, provided shelter, and shared knowledge about flood mitigation. "Your mother first came to us through a storm," Joseph told Elena and the twins as they watched rescue operations from the safety of their reinforced home. Now our family helps others through storms. That's what it means to give back. During this monsoon season, an unexpected delegation arrived. The Phoenix banking firm that had once employed Rachel, now seeking her expertise for their corporate social responsibility program. They proposed a major investment in reservation-based financial literacy programs, with Rachel as the lead consultant. The meeting stirred complex emotions. The polished executives from her former life seemed from another universe compared to the woman she'd become. Yet Rachel recognized an opportunity to bridge that gap, to bring responsible financial resources to communities that had welcomed her. "I'll consider the position," Rachel told them, "but any program must be designed with indigenous input at every level, not just consultation after the fact." The bank agreed, recognizing that authentic engagement required surrendering some control. Rachel began designing a curriculum that respected both financial realities and cultural values, creating internship pipelines for tribal youth to enter finance careers while maintaining community connections. As winter settled in, Rachel's pregnancy advanced while external recognition continued growing. She was selected for the prestigious MacArthur Fellowship, an honor that came with a significant grant and considerable media attention. The foundation praised her work in creating economic models that honor traditional knowledge while embracing technological innovation. The fellowship brought resources for expansion, but also scrutiny. Overnight, Rachel found herself positioned as a spokesperson for Indigenous economic development, a role that felt simultaneously empowering and constraining. "Remember, you're still you," Margaret advised during one overwhelming period. "Recognition changes what people want from you, not who you are inside." The attention did enable larger projects. With fellowship funding, Rachel launched a mentorship network connecting Indigenous entrepreneurs across North America. The Desert Wisdom Exchange expanded to include Maori knowledge keepers from New Zealand and Aboriginal advisors from Australia, creating global dialogue about traditional ecological knowledge and modern sustainability. During her 8th month of pregnancy, Rachel received an urgent call from Washington. The Secretary of the Interior wanted to meet about potentially scaling her programs nationally through federal support. The opportunity was massive but complicated. Federal funding comes with federal strings. "We can't let them define our success." "Metrics," Sarah cautioned during family discussions. "Remember, we judge success by community well-being, not just economic indicators." Rachel flew to Washington, accompanied by Margaret, who insisted on joining to observe the government's protocols. The meeting proved transformative. The secretary genuinely understood the importance of tribal sovereignty and wanted to create frameworks that amplified rather than supplanted Indigenous leadership. They returned with tentative agreements that would bring substantial resources while preserving tribal decision-making authority. The contracts took months to finalize, requiring lawyers fluent in both federal policy and Indigenous law. In spring, Rachel gave birth to a daughter they named Lily Rose. Her arrival during the season of renewal felt symbolic, new life emerging from the family structure they'd built through storms and struggles. 5 children, Emma marveled, holding her new sister. "When we first came here, I couldn't have imagined our family growing this big." "Family isn't measured in numbers," Margaret observed, wrapping traditional blessings around the newborn. "It's measured in how much love can be shared." That summer brought celebration as Jackson prepared for his aerospace program. The entire community gathered for his send-off, acknowledging both his departure and his promise to return with skills that would benefit the land. "Learn all they'll teach you," Michael addressed his nephew. "But remember, the stars guide us home, whether we're here or 1,000 miles away." The federal partnership materialized through something called the Indigenous Innovation Initiative. Rachel became the first Native American lead coordinator, a role that required frequent travel but offered unprecedented resources for tribal communities. She established rotating leadership, ensuring the ranch's operations continued seamlessly during her absences. The systems she'd implemented had evolved beyond dependence on any individual, becoming truly community-owned infrastructures. During one pivotal Washington visit, Rachel testified before Congress about economic sovereignty on tribal lands. She shared the story of that night in the storm, how a crisis can reveal strengths we never knew we possessed. 7 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything, she told the assembled lawmakers. But sometimes, what looks like catastrophic loss is actually the universe creating space for something better. The storm that brought me to the reservation taught me that isolation is fatal, but community is resilient. Her words resonated beyond the hearing room. Video clips circulated widely, leading to more speaking invitations than she could accept. But Rachel had learned to navigate recognition without letting it define her. Fame is weather, Joseph reminded her, when opportunities threaten to overwhelm. It comes and goes. What matters is the ground we tend daily. Back home, tangible changes continued. Emma's architectural designs attracted national attention, particularly her modular housing concept that could be transported to remote areas and assembled using local labor and materials. Major construction firms expressed interest in licensing her innovations. The Desert Wisdom Exchange facilitated its first international program, bringing Navajo water management expertise to Australia during their severe drought. The ranch hosted Aboriginal delegations, creating unexpected synergies between desert peoples separated by oceans, but united by similar challenges. Christina's seed preservation project evolved into a genetic library, not just preserving varieties, but studying how traditional agricultural practices influenced plant resilience. Her work attracted grants from environmental foundations interested in how indigenous knowledge could address climate change. Meanwhile, the children thrived in their expanded roles. Elena showed affinity for diplomacy, often mediating disagreements between siblings with impressive insight. The twins, Benjamin and Sophia, now 9 years old, had become inseparable from the ranch's horses, their riding skills advancing quickly under Joseph's patient guidance. One evening, as Rachel nursed baby Lily while reviewing federal compliance documents, Emma asked, "Do you ever miss the simplicity of just helping one family at a time?" "We're still helping families," Rachel responded thoughtfully. "Just more of them, in more complex ways. Scale doesn't change purpose. It just expands responsibility." As autumn approached again, marking 8 years since that transformative storm, the family faced another significant development. The federal government proposed designating their region as a National Heritage Education Zone, bringing protected status and tourism revenue, but also potential over-commercialization. Rachel found herself once again negotiating between opportunity and risk, this time with the entire community's input. Town halls, elder councils, and youth forums all contributed to decision-making processes that honored traditional governance while accommodating modern legal requirements. "The land doesn't negotiate," Margaret reminded everyone during discussions. "We negotiate with ourselves about how to honor it while sharing its beauty." Eventually, they accepted the designation with strict conditions: tourist numbers limited by seasonal capacity, mandatory cultural sensitivity training, and guaranteed revenue sharing for community projects. Rachel's experience in corporate negotiation proved invaluable in crafting agreements that protected their way of life while expanding opportunities. The first tour groups under the Heritage Program arrived in October. Visitors experienced traditional ceremonies, learned about contemporary tribal life, and understood how old wisdom informed modern solutions. Revenue immediately funded education initiatives, healthcare improvements, and infrastructure upgrades. During one tour, a visiting journalist asked Rachel how she measured success. She gestured toward the landscape around them. "See that solar array? It powers our school, but students also learn about desert survival without technology. Our children speak Navajo and code in Python. Our ledgers are digital, but our decisions still seek harmony with nature. Success is keeping our options open while honoring our core." As winter settled in once more, Rachel reflected on her journey from that frightened woman stranded in a storm to someone who now influenced policy affecting millions. But truth be told, the most important transformation wasn't in scope, but in spirit. She still rose early to help with horses, taught financial basics to community members, and worried about her children's futures. The difference was in facing challenges with confidence rather than desperation, with community support rather than isolation. On a particularly clear night, as the family gathered around their fireplace with baby Lily sleeping peacefully, Margaret asked a profound question. "What would you tell that woman in the storm if you could speak to her now?" Rachel considered carefully. "I'd tell her that she's stronger than she knows, smarter than she believes, and loved in ways she can't yet imagine. That the worst night of her life is creating the foundation for her best years. That storms don't last, but what they teach us can transform everything." Joseph squeezed her hand. "And that she doesn't have to face anything alone." "Never alone," Rachel agreed, looking around at the family that had chosen her as surely as she'd chosen them. "Because home isn't where you shelter from the storm. It's who shelters with you through it." As the fire crackled and children dozed, Rachel felt profound gratitude for that terrible night 8 years ago. The storm had stripped away everything superficial, revealing the essential truth that humans thrive not through isolation, but through connection. It had forced her to accept help, leading to the discovery that giving help completes the circle of human strength. The desert wind whistled outside, no longer threatening but familiar, like an old friend sharing secrets. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and undoubtedly new storms. But now Rachel faced them not as a solitary survivor, but as a cherished member of a community that understood the deepest truth, that we are all stronger together than alone, and that sometimes losing our way is the only path to finding our home. Everything had changed since that storm, yet the most important things remained. The bonds between people who choose to love and support each other, the wisdom to ask for help when needed, and the understanding that true strength comes not from weathering storms alone, but from building shelters together. In the traditional telling of this story, it would end here, with wisdom gained and community preserved. But Rachel knew that stories like theirs don't end. They continue, each generation adding new chapters while honoring the foundation laid by those who came before. The storm had brought destruction, yes, but in its wake had grown something stronger than what had been lost. And if another storm were to rise tomorrow, the Benally Miller family would face it together with all the wisdom, strength, and love they'd cultivated through years of choosing community over isolation, tradition over rigidity, and hope over despair. For Rachel Miller, lost no longer, had finally found her way home. 10 years to the day after the storm, Rachel stood at the edge of a precipice she'd never expected to face again. This time, however, she gripped a podium rather than a steering wheel, her voice steady rather than terrified, speaking to a United Nations assembly about climate resilience and indigenous leadership. "A decade ago, I was a stranger in a desert storm," Rachel began, her words translated into multiple languages and broadcast globally. Today, I represent not just my own voice, but the collective wisdom of communities who taught me that survival isn't about fighting nature, it's about understanding it. The assembly chamber fell quiet as she continued. Indigenous knowledge systems have preserved our planet for millennia. Modern technology, when guided by traditional wisdom, rather than replacing it, creates solutions that honor both the earth and its people. Her speech outlined the success of the Desert Wisdom Exchange, now operational in 47 countries, connecting indigenous communities facing similar climate challenges. As she spoke, she thought of Margaret, now 93, and watching from the ranch via video connection, her wrinkled hands still nimble enough to weave baskets while listening to global governance discussions. After the speech, Rachel's phone buzzed with a message from Joseph. Elena just won the state science fair with her drought prediction algorithm. She says the UN is impressive, but wants to know if they'll bring solutions to real dirt. That evening, as Rachel walked through Manhattan streets to her hotel, she recognized the familiar sensation of displacement. 10 years abroad had taught her to navigate multiple worlds simultaneously: corporate boardrooms, tribal councils, academic conferences, and most importantly, evening dinners where her children shared their daily adventures. The next morning brought unexpected news. The Phoenix banking executives who'd first sought her consulting now wanted to acquire her financial literacy program outright, offering to create a foundation with Rachel as president. The compensation would secure multiple generations of her family's future. You'd have unlimited resources to expand, the CEO explained during their meeting. Full autonomy, significant endowment, global reach. Rachel requested 3 days to consider, not because she doubted her answer, but because major decisions required traditional consultation. That evening, she video called home for a family meeting. The UN speech was about honoring choices our ancestors made, Margaret said, her image grainy but authoritative. Now you face a choice that affects generations not yet born. Emma, now finishing her master's in sustainable architecture and working on disaster-resistant community designs, voiced practical concerns. Phoenix has great resources, but would you have to leave the ranch? The position doesn't require relocation, Rachel explained, but it would mean extensive travel. Jackson, calling from his aerospace internship where he designed satellite systems for precision agriculture, added perspective. Mom, you taught me to think about impact per journey. How many communities could benefit from this platform? As the family discussed pros and cons across time zones, Rachel felt profound gratitude for the communication technology that kept them connected. Yet technology alone didn't create family. Their bonds had been forged through shared storms, daily rituals, and the conscious choice to prioritize relationship over convenience. That weekend, Rachel returned home for the annual Harvest Festival, now drawing international attention. The event had evolved into a showcase of indigenous innovation, featuring everything from seed preservation techniques to renewable energy displays. Over 10,000 visitors attended, with proceeds supporting 23 reservation schools. 10 years, Sarah observed, standing with Rachel at the solar array overlook. Remember when you were afraid to use our new payment system? I remember thinking I knew nothing useful, Rachel replied. Turns out I just hadn't found where my knowledge belonged. During the closing ceremony, Margaret called Rachel forward. You arrived through a storm that taught us to extend shelter to strangers. Tonight, you must choose whether to extend that shelter beyond what we can see. Rachel faced the crowd, recognizing faces from the Phoenix delegation mixed with students. From the education center, farmers implementing her cooperative models, and children who'd learned financial literacy through her bilingual programs. For 10 years, you've taught me that home extends beyond physical boundaries, Rachel began. "Every initiative we've created returns value to this land. The foundation opportunity isn't about leaving, it's about expanding our capacity to help, while staying rooted in who we are." She'd made her decision. The family would accept the foundation offer with conditions ensuring tribal consultation on major decisions and guaranteed funding streams for reservation programs. Rachel would travel extensively, but maintain her primary residence at the ranch, using technology to bridge distances when necessary. The next months involved complex negotiations and transitions. The banking executives, having witnessed Rachel's community-centered approach, agreed to unprecedented provisions, granting tribal representatives board positions and veto power over culturally sensitive programs. Emma surprised everyone by requesting assignment to the Foundation's architecture division, proposing modular school designs that could be rapidly deployed to underserved indigenous communities. Her first project would replace flood-damaged buildings in her old Phoenix neighborhood. Jackson's satellite program received foundation funding to develop real-time environmental monitoring systems for tribal lands. His expertise would help communities predict and prepare for extreme weather events, the kind that had once brought their family to the Benali Ranch. Christina's seed bank project expanded into a genetic preservation network, safeguarding food security for climate-vulnerable regions. Her work caught the attention of international agricultural organizations seeking alternatives to corporate seed monopolies. As autumn painted the desert in fiery colors, Rachel coordinated her first major foundation initiative, a summit connecting indigenous leaders, climate scientists, and policymakers. The gathering would occur not in conference halls, but across reservation lands, allowing participants to witness successfully integrated traditional and modern solutions. "We're not creating something new," Rachel explained to skeptical bureaucrats. "We're amplifying what has always worked." The summit drew attendees from 73 countries. For 5 days, participants experienced traditional water management alongside solar technology, learned about cooperative economics while participating in community meals, and understood how ancient planting patterns informed modern agricultural innovation. On the final evening, as delegates shared stories around a ceremonial fire, Elena, now 11, and showing remarkable leadership abilities, asked the gathering a profound question. If you could send wisdom back through time to your younger self, what would you say? Responses varied by culture, but shared common themes. Patience, humility, and the recognition that perceived weakness often conceals strength. When Rachel's turn came, she spoke honestly. "I would tell myself that getting lost in a storm wasn't failure. It was redirection. That accepting help doesn't diminish you. It reveals your capacity for connection. And that home isn't a place you find, but a community you choose to build." As the summit concluded, Rachel received transformative news. The UN Climate Division wanted to establish her foundation as the official Indigenous Knowledge Integration Center, a position that would influence global environmental policy for decades. The offer arrived as her youngest, Lily, now 6 and full of questions about everything, asked during dinner, "Mom, why do people at the UN need you to tell them about the weather? Don't they have eyes to see?" Her innocent insight captured a profound truth. Modern governance often becomes so complex it forgets to observe nature's obvious signals. The Foundation's role would be translating traditional awareness into contemporary action. On the 10th anniversary of that life-changing storm, the family returned to the exact spot where their car had died. The road had been improved, safety infrastructure installed, but the essence of the location remained. Joseph proposed. They recreate the moment, voluntarily stopping their vehicle at midnight during a predicted storm. This time, Their children were prepared with warm clothes, working flashlights, and the confidence that help would arrive. As rain began falling, the family huddled together in their modern SUV. No fear gripped them, only anticipatory excitement and deep gratitude. "Look," Benjamin pointed through the window. Approaching lights pierced the darkness, not rescue vehicles, but fellow travelers they'd called to join their commemoration. Soon, multiple cars formed a makeshift village in the desert night. Families emerged with thermos containers of hot soup, traditional stories, and weather updates via satellite phones. Children played rain games, while adults shared memories of the ranch's transformation. Their stranded state became celebration rather than crisis. "Your mother was terrified that night," Joseph told the children gathered in their car. "She thought she was protecting you by hiding her fear. Now she protects others by sharing her wisdom." As thunder rumbled overhead, Lily pressed her face against the window. "It's beautiful when you're not alone." The storm passed quickly, leaving crystalline air and the scent of wet sage. As families prepared to return to their homes, Rachel realized she'd spent 10 years learning this fundamental truth. Storms arrive for everyone, but the community determines whether they destroy or transform. A year later, the Foundation's impact rippled globally. Over 200 indigenous-led initiatives received funding and technical support. The cooperative models Rachel developed were adapted by communities from Arctic tundra to Amazon rainforest. Her financial literacy programs ran in 14 languages, including digital formats designed by her children. Margaret, despite growing frailty, remained actively involved through video consultation. Her recorded wisdom, carefully preserved by the Oral History Project, guided decisions when tradition met innovation. Younger elders were prepared to continue her role, having learned that knowledge transfer requires relationship, not just information. The ranch itself had become a living laboratory. Solar arrays powered electric vehicle charging stations. Traditional gardens incorporated permaculture principles. The visitor center hosted immersive programs where guests experienced daily life, not just observational tourism. Emma's architectural firm, now internationally recognized, maintained its headquarters on tribal land. Her designs prioritized climate resilience while respecting cultural aesthetics. Housing projects across the Southwest reflected her philosophy that buildings should protect inhabitants while strengthening community bonds. Jackson's satellite network provided early warning systems for extreme weather, assisting not just tribal communities, but any vulnerable population. His technology became standard equipment for humanitarian organizations, while he returned monthly to the ranch for family gatherings and cultural grounding. On a clear spring morning, Rachel stood on the expanded porch of their home, watching. Lily and the twins lead horses to pasture. Elena was video calling Emma for advice on a school presentation about their family's journey. In the distance, solar panels gleamed while traditional ceremonies prepared the earth for planting season. "Almost ready for DC?" Joseph asked, bringing coffee as they prepared for another Foundation board meeting. "As ready as anyone is for changing." "The world before lunch," Rachel smiled, "though I'm starting to see that changing the world happens through millions of small decisions made consciously every day." That evening, as federal delegates toured their latest renewable energy installation, Elena asked Rachel privately, "Do you ever wish that night had never happened?" Rachel knelt to meet her daughter's eyes, Emma and Jackson's eyes, really, full of question and understanding. "That storm brought me to your father, to this family, to a life I couldn't have imagined. I wish for different things now." "What do you wish for?" "That more people learn what I learned, that asking for help opens doors to unexpected wisdom. That traditional knowledge and modern innovation need each other. That home is wherever you choose to plant love and let it grow." As sunset painted the desert landscape, Rachel reflected on her transformation. The frightened woman of 10 years ago had believed independence meant isolation. Today's Rachel understood that true independence comes from interdependence, the strength to ask for help and the wisdom to offer it. Their story had become larger than personal triumph. It demonstrated how crisis could catalyst connection, how strangers could become family, how traditional wisdom could illuminate modern challenges. Most importantly, it showed that home wasn't about returning to the start, but about choosing where and with whom to write new chapters. That night, as her family gathered for dinner, physical and virtual presence blending seamlessly, Rachel gave thanks not for avoiding storms, but for finding those who'd carry her through them. The desert had taught its lesson well. We are shaped by what challenges us, but defined by how we respond to those challenges together. Outside, stars emerged in the infinite desert sky. Coyotes sang their ancient songs while solar batteries stored. Tomorrow's energy, traditional songs mixed with children's laughter, creating the soundtrack of a life fully lived. Rachel closed her eyes, listening to the harmony of old and new, individual and community, past wisdom and future potential. 10 years after giving up hope in a storm, she'd discovered that hope wasn't something you found. It was something you created through choosing connection over isolation, gratitude over resentment, and growth over resignation. The storm had passed, but its gifts remained. And in the shelter they'd built together, physical, emotional, spiritual, Rachel knew their family would weather whatever the desert chose to send next. For they had learned the most crucial lesson the land could teach, that in the face of any storm, we are never truly alone unless we choose to be. And sometimes, just sometimes, getting lost is the only way to discover where we truly belong. Up next, you got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.